Welcome again, everyone, to another episode of Empire State of Cannabis. Whether you're listening or watching, we actually have another in-person interview with a very, very special guest. It was actually the first guest on Empire State of Cannabis, Assemblywoman Donna Lupardo, chair of the Ag Committee, and she is the Assemblywoman for Binghamton, Endwell, Endicott area. Donna, welcome back.
Good to be here. Nice to see you.
Yeah, definitely. So it's been over a year. I think the last time we recorded, it was like a few weeks before the world went to hell completely. So it was like the end of February. And I think at that point there was still some hope. Maybe there was going to be some action on adult use. The hemp extract law had just been signed into law pursuant to chapters that January. So now we are, 15 months from then, from the last interview. So where do you see the hemp program as it stands today in New York, the cannabinoid hemp program in New York?
Well, I mean, obviously, we've had a lot of work to do to try to get our arms wrapped around all of the challenges that we were facing, because when we obviously put out a lot of licenses, surprisingly, the majority of people went for CBD or hemp extract licenses, when many of us thought the fiber and grain side would have been as interesting. We wound up with a glut of product. We were also, as you know, blindsided by an oversupply coming from not only out of state but out of country of questionable quality. So we had a lot of things to bob and weave around. Certainly oversupply and lack of education on part of our consumers. So with the extracts bill finally being chaptered, changed, gone through all the regulatory hoops and problems we had, certainly over flour, which we can talk about some more. Those regs ought to be sorted out momentarily. And then we're going to be, I think, in a better shape in terms of consumer protections, proper labeling, and also allowing food and beverage to be
well, food and beverage, and this is what we've been talking about since 2019, is allowing for food and beverage, legitimizing supplements, right? And it almost feels like New York and you especially had this great idea to get out in front of it, regulate it. Then other states took that idea, implemented it very quickly, and kind of leapfrogged New York. And now we're here and we still don't have final regs. And I think a lot of people are just kind of scratching their head where they're like, oh, they were so excited about it at first, and now a year and a half later, it's like the SpongeBob episodes where they're like 20 years later, right? And I feel like we're kind of in that loop. But what's interesting about the original hemp extract law, because you talk about oversupply, is that there was actually solutions to prevent New York being flooded with, product and, just badly labeled product or just, bad quality product. And a lot of those provisions were opposed by, larger groups, national groups, and they were eventually taken out in chapters, right? So there was safeguards against that, right?
Well, this oversupply didn't just occur in New York State.
No.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But
Kentucky is having,
Sure.
It has been a disaster.
But when you talk about other states, don't you think that New York's consumer protections and our QR codes and the rest of what we're approaching will help move this to a place where we're more competitive, or have we been leapfrogged on that as well?
Well, that's a good question, because it's a tough thing to say, right? Because now everyone learned about hemp after the Farm Bill, and then everyone jumped in. There's a lot of money put into it, and now it's kind of contracting, right? But there is still this market and amount of consumers that really do, want CBD. So I guess and non-psychoactive cannabinoids. So the question I think the industry is wrangling with is like, why are there, the new customers, right? The customers that seemingly haven't been able to be reached, right? Because they don't trust CBD. Is that trust been completely eradicated, or can it be built back through standards like what New York State is doing? So that's where I think the big opportunity is to expand the market, is that once New York actually does have regulations in place, once the consumer can actually start to trust that what they buy in New York is safe and effective and labeled correctly, then yeah, absolutely, I do think the advantage is there. But the question is has that trust been eroded too much?
I don't think so at all. Yeah. I don't even think we've scratched the surface for a majority of consumers, because many of them really don't know what this is.
Yeah.
I mean, they certainly see the stores and they hear the buzz, but I think a lot of them need general education on what these varietals are about, what these extracts do, nutritional supplements. So I think there's a certain group of people, but we're operating sometimes in a bit of a vacuum, where we see what's going on, and we're reacting to the people who go in and do arbitrary tests and find out there wasn't CBD at all in the bottle, that it was some sort of concoction and some sort of synthetic. But the public in general, I think, really views this from, I'm not quite sure what this does, and it seems expensive. I think the price point has been off-putting to some people, but in general, there's reluctance to try something new. I find myself explaining this to a lot of people who get it mixed up. And what is this all about? So I think this is a great opportunity to educate the public about what it is. But as you know, I've been preaching this for a long time. I think the price point needs to be more competitive.
Yeah, well, that's a great point, and you're right. And it needs to become more of an ingredient. CBD needs to become more of an ingredient than just the product, right? And you talk about reaction. How difficult is it as a lawmaker not to be reactionary, right? Because almost like there's all these issues, right? I mean, there's a plethora of issues that are facing the state on any given year, any given legislative session, any given day, right? And so when you have an industry like cannabis that's so fast moving, right? Like you said, you start the hemp program. What do you know about hemp? That it's, there's great rope substitute, there's building materials, there's all these great things, right? And then the hemp starts to get going, and then people realize, oh, we can grow other cannabinoids as hemp. And then CBD blows up, and then it goes down, and then hemp flower blows up, right? That definitely wasn't in consideration of the bill. So, is it tough from a regulatory perspective and from a lawmaker perspective to try to keep up on developments in the industry from a legislative perspective? I mean, you only get one legislative session a year, too, so.
Well, yeah, it doesn't help that we have a federal government that's all over the map. It doesn't help that we have banking outside of our, we really can't access banking in many cases. It's really difficult in the medical front when insurance won't recognize this, when researchers are always having to look over their shoulders as to whether they can do this or not. So yeah, in general, to have federal government not a wide open partner is the biggest challenge of all. As far as convincing my colleagues that we had an industrial, I call it an industrial workhorse of a product that could be grown for fiber, for grain, and for nutritional supplements and all the rest, was a huge eye-opener to them. Now, we thought we were really at the forefront of something big, and I still think we can be. But a day does not go by that I am not grateful to the early risk takers, the financial risk takers, the farmers and the processors and everyone else who got out in front of this, and at great expense to themselves.
And that trailblazing. So, on that, I think we've seen this almost not final evolution, but the next step of evolution in legalizing cannabis in New York, right? You had medical, hemp, now adult use. So adult use bill was a legislative effort more than anything else, right? And when I say that, I mean that.
Sure. Unlike other states.
Yeah, unlike other states. And yeah, exactly. It wasn't a ballot initiative, but also it was the legislature's bill. Yeah, there was negotiations with the gov, but the governor's bill was very different from the MRTA. So, the Assembly and the Senate, really weighed in. So what did you see coming out of that as some of the major wins from your perspective on the MRTA?
Well, there were so many of us working on the bill. I was responsible for making sure that the hemp part was correct, because we had a major fix that had to be put in there when it came to flour.
Hemp flour, yeah.
So the compromise, of course, we had to reach, because the general resistance to smoking from the governor's office is to legalize flour so long as it wasn't marketed for smoking purposes, which means it couldn't be sold either with rolling papers or pre-rolled. And then you can still sell it, but it has to be sold in a adult use cannabis dispensary.
Yeah, if it has a pre-roll, if it's a pre-roll,
flour.
yeah.
Don't get me started on that compromise, but nonetheless. So I was looking after the flour and making sure that was part of it. I was also engaged in the social equity component to make sure that in addition to helping communities that were disproportionately affected by the drug war, that we also looked after our farmers. And rather than calling this group disadvantaged, because I thought that would not be appreciated, the language in the bill refers to them as distressed farmers, those who were hurt by the lowering of the commodity price, those who had crop losses. Again, back to the early risk takers. We're very mindful that those folks ought to have a heads up. They should have an advantage. They should have mentoring opportunities. They should be given every opportunity to get into this cannabis play. So that was my part, to make it up in some ways to our CBD growers, that they would be given some extra advantage in the process for licensing in particular, and whatever else we are going to make available to them. So flower, distressed farmers, and also, I was advising on all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And the fact that even though you cannot legally purchase adult use cannabis right now, you can legally possess up to 3 ounces and smoke it anywhere you can legally smoke tobacco, which I think came as a big surprise to a lot of people when the ink was dried.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, so you're part of it. I think a lot of the prime, right? So Crystal was from Buffalo, and Liz Kruger in the Senate, Manhattan. I think a lot of the focus was not on the effects that legalization would have on the agricultural sector, and so I think that's where you came in, right? And
yes,
your advice. So as ag chair, you've seen a lot of different. I mean, we talk about this a lot on this show about how diverse our agricultural sector is in New York, right? Do you think there's a place, even if it's a kind of a niche spot, part of the agricultural economy in New York for cannabis grown for adult use? Like, do you think
there certainly had better be.
That's a good answer.
We have a lot of farmers who are engaged in growing a lot of different crops and handling a lot of different livestock, and this is a critical piece of it as far as I'm concerned. And I also believe that our hemp farmers should have a leg up. They have a skill set that is unique and valuable, and I think they're going to be sought after, and we're going to certainly make sure that people know who they are and how they can be reached. So yes, I see this as an absolutely essential, you want to call it a niche, I think it's going to be bigger than that.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry, so there's obviously room for a lot of people.
Yes, and municipalities are finally coming to understand that they cannot regulate those grow operations out of their areas. They have the option to opt out of on-site consumption or retail sales, but as far as grow operations and the processing that goes with it, those will be placed where where they can go without being blocked.
So, when you've been in the Assembly a while now and in leadership, almost all of your Republican colleagues vote against the MRTA, right? But yet we're not actually seeing the most conservative areas of the state looking to opt out, right? It's almost this curious situation. Well, if you look at the polling, Republicans support legalization, right? So what is it? What is it about your colleagues on the other side of the aisle? Are they just fill in the gaps for us, because I don't think anyone understands why Republican representatives are still against legalization. They're not coming to the table to work on a bill.
Well, first of all, I'm not as optimistic as you are about rural areas not opting out. I've certainly heard of some fairly, some mid-sized upstate cities where their mayors are very opposed. As far as my Republican colleagues go, I think they are very much wedded to the soft-on-crime narrative. And I do think that they view this as part of that.
Yeah.
I really do. And I think that for a lot of them, there's a fear of things going wrong, that somehow crime will spike and people will be engaging in driving while impaired, and the children will, unlike the children right now who are engaging in this activity from unknown street vendors, dealers. I think they have that narrative, and they also have fear about of the unknown, about what this will mean for their communities.
Yeah.
But still.
It's still, and it doesn't even make
Still.
electoral sense either. I mean, it's, and so,
Well, this wasn't a slam dunk for my constituents either. I mean, when you spend a lot of time focusing on some one topic, people seem to think this is all you work on.
Yeah.
And the media comes to me all the time on this topic, and I have to explain this is one thing, but
Yeah.
I do a lot of other work.
Yeah.
And my seniors in particular are concerned about the long-term future for their younger family members and the like. So anyway, it hasn't all been just a smooth road for me either.
Yeah. Well, so you went to Albany though in person to speak on the bill. A lot of your colleagues were just on Zoom, and I think you had told me you need to be there.
Even when we passed the bill?
Yeah, when we passed the bill.
I absolutely had to be there. I've been working on this for a very long time.
It's historic.
And also I wanted to provide some moral support to Crystal People-Stokes, who was on the floor debating it, and I needed to be ready in case questions came up about the hemp part or about the distressed farmers. But I've managed to develop a good working relationship with the Republicans on the Ag Committee, and they were already primed and completely supportive of that part of the bill. So it was just nice to be there in person to enjoy the moment.
We watched it. My parents I don't think they ever believed they would see that day.
Well, I hope we do see that day, because right now...
well, and what's going on with that? I mean, have you heard any movement on employment? Are you guys going back to session at any point,
Well, keep in mind, it's a Senate process. The Assembly is not involved with that. I wish we
you have
wish
the
we
pick.
could be.
The Assembly has the one pick.
Well, on the board, but as far as the
Nominations,
appointments of the two big positions, that those will be Senate appointments. So I
Gotcha.
certainly hope they come back soon.
Yeah.
I do think a monkey wrench was put into the works when, the assumed pick was, some resistance came about for that pick, and so then no one knew how to quickly pivot to some other place. There are a lot of qualified people out there who could do a very good job right now.
20 million people in New York.
And, we don't have a lot of time to waste here, folks. No. We're already surrounded by other states and places, and now they're moving past us, and where is the sense of urgency, I'm asking, and along with a lot of other people.
Yeah.
We had already had, some adjustments to make, thinking it would be a year and a half. It couldn't possibly go any longer than that without us just looking like fools, to be honest.
Looking like fools, yeah. This happened in Massachusetts, and I've been saying this. It's only going to hurt small businesses. It's only going to hurt social equity entrepreneurs, because what do they do now, from now for 2 years? If you're one of these big companies and you have millions of dollars to ride this out, well, fine. You're well positioned, right? And even the medical ROs, if they can expand their dispensaries footprints, they're going to start benefiting from sales a year before anyone else can. It just doesn't make sense. Now,
but what also we're going to see is the sophisticated upgrading of the underground.
Yeah, which we're already seeing.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And people are just going to do what they're going to do in the meantime. You talk about leadership. What do you think some of the qualities we need to see in leadership at the OCM, and priorities? What would you like to see from the leader in terms of like an archetype, not a specific person, but what are the things that you think are almost like non-negotiables?
Well, the first thing, the main thing that comes to mind for me is this person has to be fiercely pro-New York.
Great point.
And they have to understand that we are trying to grow New York businesses, and that we do not want some, large players coming in and taking away job opportunities for our communities. We're not trying to rebuild our whole economy around this. This is a huge opportunity for us to grow in communities that need the development.
Yeah.
So they need to be pro New York. And they have to be comfortable talking to all the players. They have to be comfortable with the Farm Bureau. And they have to understand what our MWBEs are going through. And they really need to be connected, seriously connected to the social equity component of this. I mean, these resources that are coming in have got to be targeted to the places that really need it the most.
Yeah.
Where we have to make up for what's occurred over decades.
Yep.
So this person has to be very, very very, very much connected to all of the pieces of the puzzle and not be bought and sold in any way, shape, or form
Yeah.
by interests that are contrary to New York's interests.
Yeah. Yeah.
To
Exactly.
be blunt about it.
Yeah. And like you said, you'd think that there would be people to pick, right? And I feel like at this point, it's just getting, mucked up in the whole political
Well,
process.
sometimes in New York, when the train is barreling down the tracks and it gets derailed, people just don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's what's happened.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
now
you've
what are
probably
we
seen this
supposed to do?
before
Oh,
amongst many
absolutely.
issues.
Because
Yeah.
then it opens up a whole can of worms. Well, now what?
Yeah.
And now there's a big scrum on the field to catch the ball.
Yep.
So
There's an election on the horizon now.
all kinds of things.
know.
It's typical. It's very typical of
Yeah.
New York. But someone just has to say, this is more important than that.
Do you think it's a potential strategy, or
No.
would it be okay for you to appoint a board and not an ED?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. I'll lob that one back to you.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I don't know. At this point, it almost seems like anything is better than nothing. But then also, without that leadership, it leaves a void that maybe, can be influenced from chamber or the second floor, right? Some of these regulations, because the executive director is supposed to develop the regulations, not the board. The board's supposed to approve them.
Right, that's why you stumped me there for a second. I'm not sure how that happens.
yeah. Well, yeah. So that's a process that's laid out in the MRTA at least.
Right.
So you name some wins in the MRTA. Do you think there is a need for any sort of cleanup bills or any sort of legislative fixes beyond the bill? And
Well, we can certainly talk about some initiatives that have come from some of my colleagues about the energy efficiency piece. I do think we need to be mindful of that going forward, but we really need to craft that in a way that doesn't wind up hurting the subject matter.
Yeah.
I know that's something you've been interested in for some time, and
Yeah.
have some interesting ideas on how we might, make it, provide more of an incentive for people to be mindful of that.
Yep.
As you know, I'm still going to be tinkering around on the flower side of things
Yeah.
as people become more comfortable with what that's all about. But so what else do you think we should be looking at?
Well, I mean, there's obviously the THC tax. That's going to be a disaster, and we've already
Of
talked
course,
about that. But
yes.
that's a whole nother
That's
thing.
a whole nother matter. Not sure
It,
where that came from. But
Yeah. Well, so is it almost like a situation where, like, the hemp extract law was decently vague, but it could have been followed to a way that the legislative intent could have been followed, and it really wasn't on a lot of ways.
correct.
Same thing I think could happen with the regs around adult use. So is it a situation where you and your colleagues are like, okay, we'll see what the regs are, but if they don't follow the intent, we're gonna make you follow the intent. Yeah.
Well, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And we've had some success with that on the
Yeah.
flower side, even though we had this compromise that
Yeah.
was hatched.
Yeah, because the bill, I think really pushed them forward, and I think it took everyone by surprise that they banned flower. They didn't have to. That's the thing.
Well, as I said earlier, they were under the assumption that it was purchased solely for smoking purposes. And they were unaware that, all you have to do is Google uses for hemp flower.
Yeah.
And you'll see long lists of things that people are interested in doing something with.
Is there anything you want to see to continue to push the industrial side of hemp? Whether it's
Most definitely.
Yeah.
I think maybe I started off by talking about fiber and
Yeah.
grain. I think there's just huge opportunities there. I know one of my colleagues, Carrie Warner, and I have been talking about working on a how are we calling it, farm to fashion initiative.
Oh, cool.
Trying to loop
All right.
in the Fashion Institute
Yeah.
of Technology and others so we can really attract the Patagonias of the world who are looking at textiles and other companies that want this more sustainable textile to work with, in their product lines. Also, I'm surprised that we're not doing more on grain. It is an amazing food source,
Yeah.
just fantastic at a time when people want alternatives, especially alternative proteins and source for amino acids, for example. It is just a terrific product.
Yeah.
It's just not as flashy and sexy as CBD.
Yeah.
But I think fiber and grain, or people growing hybrids where you can do, can get a fiber and
grain
and a
at-
seed
in
at
the
the
same
same
crop.
time. It's a
Yep.
different type of fiber.
Mhm.
Also, I think there's huge opportunity in nanocellulose. I've talked to the folks here at Binghamton University's battery lab. We have Stan Whittingham's lab
Yep.
here.
Nobel Prize winner.
Our Nobel Prize winner, inventor of the lithium-ion battery.
Yeah.
And everyone has a buzz for a long time about how hemp fiber could be a graphene replacement.
A carbon source.
Much cleaner
Mm-hmm.
in our batteries. At the time when we were getting research dollars that were primarily going to Cornell, they put forward a research proposal to look at nanocellulose. Clarkson had done some original studies on this. That's a vast opportunity for us to look at hemp fiber for that kind of industrial battery use.
Yeah.
And I remember bringing a whole bag of fiber stalks, in fact, to the battery lab so that they could do some preliminary studies. And this stuff is fascinating,
Yeah.
not just for textiles, but for conductivity, I think is how they would describe it.
Yeah, we had Mark Privatera on this show about a year ago at this point, and he spoke a lot about that. And he said, there's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars investment needed. It almost seems like it's a little bit beyond the capabilities of the state, right? The federal government really needs to get involved in that side of the industry.
Yes.
Now, with the majority and with, President Biden pushing an infrastructure bill, do you think there is an opportunity there for federal legislation that's going to push it along either through incentives or grants or something? I mean, because hemp also gets wrapped up into this kind of clean infrastructure idea, right? And, green infrastructure. So do you think there's some opportunity there? And are the stakeholders on the federal level, you think, engaged on that issue? Or
No, I don't think they're engaged at this level.
Yeah.
At this point, everybody's just sort of poking their heads back up after COVID. And
Yeah.
I think Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas said something interesting the other day, indicating that we have to do something on federal cannabis policy.
Yeah.
A very conservative fellow, and I hope he didn't mean to just squash everything that the states are doing. But I think the train has definitely left the station, and the fact that he indicated enough is enough here, it's hard for us to keep track, is positive news. But yeah, I would hope so. I really would hope that the federal government would step up and see the opportunities for all of these industrial purposes, medical as well as adult use.
Yeah. Well, it'd also be great if they took our hemp program and adopted it into the FDA, right?
That would be great.
Well, Donna, thank you. I mean, we talk about you a lot on this show and how you've been, a trailblazer and a real leader, for hemp and cannabis and,
Thanks,
someone who's,
Brian.
sticking your neck out for the farmers and, people who, maybe don't have representation that other groups do in Albany. So I think everyone really appreciates that in the industry.
Thanks.
And, I think your attitude, there's always more work to be done. I think that resonates with a lot of people in the industry because there really always is. And there's always something, some people are always, very cynical about New York State and how processes work on, the state level. And they're like, well, it's just one thing after another. But,
Well,
you got to
something
try.
big like this, you can't just sort of rest on your laurels.
Yeah.
Oh, we got it passed, and see you later.
Yep. Yep.
This is way too complicated. Every day a new twist comes up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to thank you, because you've been very helpful to me and to a lot of your peers in trying to make sense of all this. So
Well, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. This has been another great episode of Empire State of Cannabis. The only way you're going to still see these episodes and listen to episodes is if you subscribe. It's very simple. Just go to the app and subscribe. Like us on Facebook, Instagram. Some great new content coming, and have a good one.